Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Am I well heard? I'm accused of having a soft voice, so I want to make sure you can hear me. I'm told to introduce myself, and we'll just get started with the last session. Thank you so much for staying for the home stretch. And I'd like to thank the organizers, Julie and Sana and Josh and whoever else was on the committee for inviting me. This has been a great conference, and I'm really delighted to be able to present my work here. So I'm Dr. Rhonda Kost. I'm at Rockefeller University, which is a research-only biomedical university, so we're not an academic medical center. We focus entirely on research. I'm talking today about a project that really started 20 years ago. I won't take you through all of it. We'll kind of zip through time, empowering the participant voice, about building research participant experience evidence base to improve clinical research. So this is funded, the current work is funded by NIH NCATS, the Center for Advancing Clinical Translational Science, and by 6 CTSA awards. I have no financial conflicts of interest. And these are my partners. This is a collaboration of 6 institutions, but we have several additional institutions coming on, including UMich. So I'll be talking about the work before the early adopters. I am an internist trained in infectious diseases, and in a former life I was a molecular virologist, and then 25 years ago I came to Rockefeller, and I wear multiple hats. I was the research participant advocate initially. I've been on the IRB for 25 years, and I'm now vice chair for the last 7 years. My interest in human research protections has sort of threaded through my role as an associate professor of clinical investigation, my IRB work, of course, and my other role as co-director of community-engaged research. So why measure the participant experience? So this started at the beginning of my time at Rockefeller when we got a directive for DSMPs, data and safety monitoring plans, and then another directive to make sure everyone had human subjects protection training, and then another quickly that everyone should have GCP. And our question was, this is fine, this is great, this training all sounds great, but does it work? What does it do for participants? And so I got this bee in my bonnet to try to develop a set of measures of the participant experience that we could then compare. And if you sort of jump ahead to 25 years later, 20 years later now, as we talk about different approaches to engaging communities, to inclusion, to improving informed consent, to more representative recruitment. We have all these initiatives, and we can report our anecdotes, but is there any way at scale to sort of understand the impact of these innovations on the research experience? So experiences matter. Informed consent is a core value of human research protections, and it's gotten better. But as we heard about several times over the last 2 days, consent forms are still very difficult. We heard about several different approaches to being more participant-centered or participant-centered in an informed consent process, so it's still very problematic. And when we talk to small groups, we do focus groups, we do studios, whatever, we learn about the experiences of a small group. So if we try to generalize that, we don't have a way at scale to understand if that intervention works for everyone or for different groups. So that's what patient experience, participant experience measures is really about, trying to have a way at scale to measure the effectiveness and generalizability or group specificity of interventions that we learn about maybe in smaller settings. So it doesn't replace small group qualitative research. It's kind of an oscillation iteration. You learn something, you try it, you test it at scale. How does it work? Then maybe it doesn't work in some settings, and you go back to those settings and try to find out why. So this project, this talk is sort of about that idea, and then a tool for measures, and then building infrastructure to use it, and then a paradigm for how to use it going forward. So this journey started, as I said, quite a while ago. We had this idea, so we got some funding. We put a group of collaborators together to ask participants, mostly participants, but also, I'll go to this slide, this is who we asked. We did focus groups with healthy volunteers, participants from studies about diseases, IRB chairs, investigators, coordinators, sort of the whole range of stakeholders. And this is just a little piece of it because I wanted to show that we had some diversity in those focus groups, even now 20 years ago. And this was a robust qualitative process, focus groups, extracting the themes, doing the preliminary validation, and then ultimately validating it in a fielding that involved 15 academic research centers. They were GCRCs and CTSAs. We sent the survey to 19,000 participants. We got 5,000 responses. And then we published our work. And we did this iteratively. So first we published the qualitative work, how we did the focus groups, what were the themes, what were the dominant themes, what were the extra themes, how did the themes compare from what participants said to what ethicists, IRB chairs said. Then we validated the survey. That's the second paper. So that's the psychometrics, the reliability, the Cronbach alphas. Most of the questions worked really well. We threw out the questions that didn't work well. So we ended up with this validated tool, 72 questions. Very long, comprehensive. Everything about how did you hear about this, the research, what was it like when you joined, what was the consent process like, what about during conduct, did you have pain that you didn't anticipate, all kinds of questions, then about closing, then about results, then about preferences, motivations to join, motivations to leave or stay, etc. Very comprehensive, a lot to ask of someone. But we published sort of a summary of this in the New England Journal, and we published all the details. So just at a very high level, what did we learn from the people who answered? We had a response rate of 25 to 30%, of course different in different groups, men, women, racial groups, ethnic groups. We had, I'll stay away from the details because I have 15 more years to talk about. So of the people who responded, 73% gave their experience the highest rating, 9 or 10 out of a scale of 0 to 10. So my slide about scoring is a little bit later. Many of these questions are actionable questions. So that means there's a best answer, right? How well did you understand the consent? Completely would be the best answer. Mostly, usually not at all. So these are just some highlights. 63% of the people answered would recommend research to friends or family. 94% said they didn't feel pressure to join. I'm reading all of it, but consent, 67% felt the consent process completely prepared them. So one of the things that bothered me about consent was that it was very IRB focused. You know, we look at the reading level, all these things are important, but everyone on the institutional side, at least at that time, decided if the consent form was good enough. Now we have a lot of initiatives to engage communities in helping us design consent forms, but it's not ubiquitous. It's still very much institutionally focused. And even Teachback, which we use, Teachback for all of our consent, and post-consent comprehension tests still ask you about what you are told in that moment, in those early conversations. Do you understand what we said? But it doesn't actually ask you if what we told you was right. You know, like 3 months later, 2 years later, when you reflect on your experience, is this what they told me would happen to me? So that's what I was interested in. Does your experience match what you were led to expect? So we also asked some things about preferences, and we learned that, I wrote 85 here, but I seem to remember 82. Anyway, a high percentage of participants said that in deciding whether to join another research study, they would want to know the results of the study. So that resonates with what Dr. Beer told us earlier, that a high percentage of individuals won't join another study if they didn't hear the results of the previous study. So it was these 72 questions, but I'll sort of give you a preview. When we did this psychometric analysis, there were 6 questions that statistically predicted the overall rating. So you could actually throw away the rest of the questions and still understand, you know, sort of the key drivers of how people rated their experiences. So at the time, I wanted my 72 questions. So this was the journey. We started fielding that survey consistently at Rockefeller. Every participant who'd come to a study received that survey at the end of their participation. The NIH Clinical Center, who was one of our partners, also fielded this survey. And a little bit later, Johns Hopkins started fielding this survey. And so how can you use it? What do you do with this survey? So you could just take a pulse. You could send the survey to a selection of participants and see what your scores are. higher than you expected, lower. Of course, then, again, this is another preview. What do you compare it to? If your participants, if 65% of your participants say they understand consent completely, that means that 35% don't. Is that what everybody's finding, or can you do better? The other thing you can do with this, depending on what other data you collect, like race, ethnicity, protocol, department, other variables, you can filter the data if you have a large enough sample, so you can begin to look at the experiences of different groups. Are certain groups having better experiences and others having worse? Is that related to protocols, protocol complexity? Is that related to demographics, background, the team? All kinds of possibilities. So that gives you, there's also good news. It's not just all bad news. You know, there's good news, there's open text comments, and people write amazing things about how grateful they are for having been in research, about how well they were treated, about their favorite investigator. Sometimes they complain about payment. Sometimes they tell you something that you didn't expect that you need to act on. So, and then you have your opportunities from scores, and you also have opportunities from this qualitative information. You also have the chance to use this in a pre-post. As I mentioned before, you can look at your score, you can do an intervention. It could be cultural humility training. It could be looking at the studies that are engaging communities in the design of the consent form. It could be a return of results initiative. These are all things that we're actually, if you jump to the present, that we're about to start doing. And then you can look pre-post if you can actually move the needle. So these are some examples. Since we've been using this at Rockefeller for a long time, we've been able to move the needle. It's always messy. It's always confounded by other things that are going on. These are not clean experiments, but we see real change in our scores. So just very briefly, this is the scores for how well did the information and discussions prepare you for your research experience. And the orange line is the aggregate score for all our labs, and the blue line is a particular group that was doing a phase 1 study with a sort of complicated agent, kind of hard to understand. Very engaged team, very interested in having a good consent process. Show them their score, and they were like, oh, how do we fall below the mean? So another researcher collaborated with them to study their consent process, engaged their participants, discovered that they were happy to be in the study, but they didn't really understand what they were receiving. Together, they revised a video. They used the video in the next phase of the trial, and the blue line went up. Another initiative, we looked at our score. I love this question. Did you feel like a valued partner in the research process? This one's highly correlated with trust and with overall rating. And we noticed back in the early 2000s that our scores, the blue line, were in the 60s. At the same time, Hopkins was going through the whole thing with Henrietta Lacks, and they had an initiative to be more proactive about making research participants feel valued. I happened to be there for a conference. I saw what they were doing. I thought, we should try that. We should try that. So we started with, we value you. We started with a banner and pins and all these things, but we also realized that we started incorporating it into how we taught consent and how we talked about return of results and how we talked about training investigators. And when we read protocols, when sometimes a protocol would come in and they'd say, we barely described it because it's just a blood draw. They don't need to know what it's about. Well, that's not really treating participants as partners. So we made it a value and we incorporated it, and I'll take credit for the blue line. Similarly, we had a consent initiative, and the orange line shows that. I think that's the one I showed you in the previous slide. So we continue the journey. We're fielding this really long survey. Various people ask for it, and they say, can you shorten it? And initially, I'm like, no, I love all my questions. They're all validated. But then I sort of get tired of it myself. It's too much data. I'm not sure how to act on it. It would be nice to have a shorter survey. Maybe I could increase my response rate. So we go back to the psychometrics. We shorten the survey. There are a few more questions that I can't part with, so I keep those. I don't do just 8. We revalidate it. We send it out through Research Match. I don't know if everyone knows what Research Match is. A registry, just as a quick way to send it to thousands of people. They're validated, they still work. So we have this short and this ultra short version, and we write a paper, and Wake Forest uses it and they write a paper. So now it's out there again. 17 institutions ask for it. I'm looking. Did anybody write it up? Anybody reporting their results? No, silence. So I have a webinar. With the CTSAs, I invite all these institutions. I present the work again. What's the problem? So I don't say it that way. I do a poll. Would you survey? Would you use it? What would you like to learn? What are the barriers? So we identify this set of common barriers, and we write a grant, empowering the participant voice. So the goal of this grant is to overcome those institutional barriers and make it easier for sites to adopt and use the survey. So what were the barriers? Which survey? Can I shorten it? Can I add my own questions? How do I do it? How do I send it? When I get it back, what do I do with the data? Oh, and who do I compare it to? So the aims of this project, which started in May of the pandemic, 2020, was to develop the infrastructure. So the infrastructure is that agreement. What are we going to do the same? And I had learned from the previous project, when you try to make everyone do everything exactly the same, it takes forever. So, and I knew from the questions and from the things that people would ask along the way that we needed flexibility. So what do we need to do that's the same? That's the core survey. And if we're going to send it different ways, if some people are sending it after consent, some people are sending it end of study, how are we going to tag that? Just so we can filter by that if we want to see if there's a difference. What do we need to drag along with the patient identifiers when we put it into the database to send the survey so that we can tell who didn't respond? So if you take a survey and you send it to, with a public link to 500 people and you get 100 responses back, you know who answered, but you don't know who didn't answer. So we added a little more burden to this by asking sites to capture the information about everyone they sent it to and share that with the project so that we could tell who hadn't answered. We could look at the representativeness of the response, because when you get a response that has a certain proportion of whatever different group, you know what that is sort of absolutely, but you don't know what was in your data set to begin with. So the first year and a half was planning all that and building the tools. So we built some software. We put the survey into REDCap, but we would put it sort of in a package. So you could download the whole package. You'd have the survey, you'd have the other data collection tools, you'd have the external modules or plugins that are a dashboard, which I'll show you. You could pipe data, sort of all the pieces were there. And of course, the other part that we couldn't control was each site's data infrastructure, where you keep your participants, how you collect your data, what you call it. That's very individual. So that had to be sort of, each site has to figure it out themselves, and then you bring that common data set to the project. So aim 2 was to do it, demonstrate it. Everyone stand up their use case, whatever that local configuration was. And then the third aim, which is this past year, is to disseminate. So the infrastructure is provided free of charge, it's downloadable, there's a guide, we provide technical support, and we're also writing the next grant to figure out how to work together. So what does the survey ask? On the next slide, I've given you all the questions, but rather than read them to you, there are a couple of questions about consent, about the form, and about the discussions. There are questions about feeling listened to, feeling respected, shown courtesy, about feeling valued, as I mentioned, whether if you had language needs, they were attended to, whether your culture was respected, whether you had enough privacy. Communication with the team. It turns out that knowing how to reach the research team when you need to is one of the most important pieces of communication. And when you think about it, if you have a side effect or a question and you can't reach the team, that might make you think twice about staying in the study, finishing the study, et cetera. Then a rating of the overall experience, as I said, 0 to 10. Would you recommend to friends and family? And then some descriptive questions, because we can't really pull out descriptive information about studies because most sites don't really have it structured in a good way for that. So we just say, how much did it demand of you? Simple, medium, or a lot, and there are little definitions. And demographics, of course. So those are the questions. You can look at the slides later. And as I said, for actionable questions, there's sort of a typical Likert scale. Did they listen carefully to you? Never. Sometimes, usually, or always. And then there are some questions for which not applicable is one of the choices, and so I didn't show an example here, but there's some of those. So this infrastructure that we built, how does it work? So you have to have REDCap. Many, many research institutions do. If you don't, I can talk to you later about how to use the survey. But you create a project in REDCap, so you need a REDCap specialist and you need someone from IT to pull your data out of your clinical trial management system or your EMR. Sometimes that's the same person, sometimes it's two different people. So you create this project, you download the file from our project that has all the pieces that I told you. You pull your participant data with an algorithm that helps you design it based on your infrastructure that pulls, the people that you want from the departments that you want at the time that you want and brings those little tags that I mentioned. You put that in the project and then it sends the surveys and your data comes back. And your data goes right to the dashboard. So that's all the plan. While you're planning, from the very beginning, you need to engage a full range of stakeholders, from your institutional leadership, research leadership, investigators, IRB privacy officer, coordinators, participants, communities, community liaisons. Why? Because they will have expectations, first because it's just right, but also they will have expectations. And what we learned when each of our sites did this locally and sort of brought the news back to us, there are fears. There are a lot of fears. Who's going to see it? What if our score is lower than everybody else's? Is this going to hurt our reputation? You're going to punish me? What if we get a score we can't fix? So all these fears, all of this can be managed with local decisions. You don't want to return results to investigators? Don't take study data. It will limit what you can learn from your information, but it might be the way to start. You can completely control who has access to the data. I'm getting de-identified data on the project, so you just need to attend to your stakeholders. It takes probably longer than you might expect to socialize it with your various stakeholders. Some institutions are all in from the beginning, and some have found it takes longer to sort of deal with everyone's fears. So all of our sites use the same core survey. So 5 sites are fielding it, plus now we have 2 early adopters and a 3rd one in the wings. All sites use the main project file. Sites do it differently. Wake Forest does what we call the enterprise model. So all their participants are in their CTMS. Every 6 months, they take everybody who's met the certain time point that they want, they send it to everybody. They do it through the patient portal, which requires just a little extra IT jiggering, but that's how they do it. They track study, they return results to departments, and I don't know what their results are, right? It's their institutions have their own privacy, I just see the aggregate stuff. Rochester also does it to enterprise, but not all of their studies are in their CTMS. So they just do their CTMS. That's where they started. Again, they do it at census, that means everybody. They have done some innovative things to try to raise their response rate. They do a 1 in 25 chance to get a $50 gift card. That boosted their response rate. They've been playing with different approaches to reach different communities. Johns Hopkins does it in enterprise, but they don't track studies. So they do a 500-person random sample to take a pulse, share good news, share comments. If there's something that looks like it's an issue sort of at the enterprise level, they think about how to address that with teaching or with something like that. So that sidesteps a lot of investigator anxiety about study results. As I said, we've been doing it forever. I return results to investigators. I present to the IRB. It's part of our quarterly CQI, continuous quality improvement. Someone said to me last month when I showed her a problem, with her study. She said, am I in trouble? Like, no, you're not in trouble. We're having a conversation. You know, what do you think? What do you think you should do? It's a minimal risk study, but it's an interesting sort of outlier finding. And instead of going straight to the IRB first, it's like, what do you think? What do you think we should do? And so that's respectful. And then maybe she'll go to the IRB with me. And Duke is the only one that's done a study-by-study implementation. How am I doing? 5 minutes. Because they wanted to socialize it that way. So they present, they get volunteers. They do it with that investigator in their study. They return their results along with, sort of in a semi-structured way, here are the resources that we have to help with outreach, community engagement. You know, here's our recruitment core. Here are the things that you can use that align with our other initiatives to address this. All right, so our dashboard. We spent a lot of time on this. You'll be able to see these. There's actually a link on our website to a narrative, that like a video, 10-minute video that takes you through the whole dashboard. But what you see listed on the left are the questions. What you see on the right are the top box scores. So a top box score is the percentage of people who gave the best answer. You can look at the full distribution of answers in other views, but top box scores are what the HCAHPS hospital surveys use, and sort of it's kind of a good standard for, that's what you're aiming for. And this drop-down filter shows you all the different ways you can filter the data. So this is just an example of these results. These are aggregate results for our 6 sites. And they're filtered by how the consent conversation took place. Mostly through video, you can't read the whole thing going up, but mostly through email or video, mostly in person, or a mixed approach. And then it's interesting that people who said no discussion of the study, which means they had waived consent or they don't remember their consent conversation, this is conditionally formatted. Obviously green is better and yellow is worse and red is even worse. So on the right, where you see the 43, no discussion, those people are not rating their research experience as highly. That's very telling. So I would want to know which studies that came from. Do we need to revisit this waiver of consent or whatever? So that dashboard is the same dashboard that you see locally. So up here are collaborating institutions with a little bar graph dashboard icon, but they all aggregate to a consortium dashboard. So that's my consortium dashboard, and the little numbers at the top are blinded numbers for the sites. So you can sort of see that there are differences across sites. Again, the green and the yellow is somewhat arbitrary, but if you compare one of the columns to the right to the total column, a good ballpark is a 10-point difference is a statistically significant difference. And across some of these values, we have a 15 or 20-point difference across sites. Now, of course, different studies are different at different sites, but as we get bigger numbers, it just sort of lets you see that it is possible to do better. If you look at your site scores or your study scores, and they are lower than the average, or they are lower than the highest outlier, then perhaps it's possible to do better. So as we test different interventions, this provides benchmarks for how one was doing before, how other sites are doing, and privacy for sites or investigators as you're doing it, but a way to use data to drive the evaluation of interventions. Here's just another filter. So all these filters here, this is by the way that what participants say about their education, and you can see that there are differences. We also have response rates. So our overall response rate right now is 17%, which I wish I could say was higher. HCAHPS has been falling for several years. HCAHPS response rates are about 19 or 20% right now. And you can see that the response rates across different sites are different, using different approaches. And so that's also something that one could iterate on. So that, findings, yeah. So just very quickly, other sites have begun to act on their findings. So this first one, the finding is 74% of participants indicated that they always knew how to reach the team, which means that 26% didn't know how. So that institution sort of did a quick intervention of providing contact information to all their participants, and it went up 9 points. This is a very compelling one. So in the preferences question, participants wanted more flexibility in timing, and this was a particular study, so they added a Saturday 1 week out of the month, and enrollment during the weeks with a Saturday is up 60%. It's not just people shifting from Tuesday to Saturday. So you might think, really, do you need this whole infrastructure to add Saturdays to your, well, apparently, although others could learn. So I'm just, in the interest of time, since I'm at the end, I'll let you read these from the slides. Rochester shares their results on a public web page. Hopkins shares their results on a public web page. All of our sites will be, within the next couple of months, putting their individual, and they've partnered with their local stakeholders to decide which results and how to frame them. They're not putting their whole dashboard up. We're in open dissemination. We're welcoming other partners. Sana in Michigan is one of our early adopter partners, and as is Columbia. And so we have a detailed implementation guide on our website. It's not just technical implementation. It starts at the very beginning with things you should think about if you want to, these considerations. Each one is, half a page. Enterprise, study level, engaging your stakeholders, leadership buy-in. How is privacy attended to? You'll probably wonder what happens, so it's all discussed, and you have local decisions you can make. And of course, if this seems like an awful lot, there are different ways to use this survey without being all in. All in would be do, our whole model. Almost all in would be maybe drop some of the metadata, or maybe don't tag departments, or maybe you want a generic survey link and just take a pulse, or maybe you just want to use the survey and you don't want to deal with the whole infrastructure, and then you can sneak a peek at the dashboard, and later, when you want to come all in, you can come all in. So there's some useful links here to our website, to our implementation guide. I just put up the narration to the dashboard on the website, and I want to make sure Sana has, I'm only 1 minute over, I think so. All right, thank you.
Where are my slides? Well, thank you, Rhonda. That was a great overview of the project. Every time I hear you presenting, I learn some, I pick up some new information. So while we're loading my slides, no. Okay, while you find my slides. So as Rhonda said, University of Michigan is one of those new sites who are in the process of joining this project. I think we reached out to Rhonda about a year ago. It's been a bit over a year, I think, last summer of 2022 when we started these conversations, and we've been in that planning process, and hopefully we're hoping that maybe sometime this fall we're gonna field the first cycle of this survey. Yeah, there we go. And and I have to say that at the University of Michigan, I think we do like such a terrific job of surveying everyone, our faculty, our students, our staff, our patients. Maybe the research participants is the only group that we're not surveying, at least not in a systematic and methodical way and centrally. So we felt that this the EPV project is a great way to allow us to do this. So what we are hoping to achieve through the survey is identify areas for improvements and benchmark against peer institutions, evaluate the effectiveness of some of the continuing quality improvement efforts to improve participant experience, increase transparency for the public accrediting bodies and potential partners on the quality of the research participant experience at the University of Michigan. We're hoping that this would also increase willingness to participate in research. Also, we're hoping that data that we will obtain through this will guide our institutional efforts aimed at fostering DEI in research, which is one of the strategic, I guess, part of the overarching strategic plan from our Office of the Vice President for Research. So the expectation is that all of the units will find a way to infuse DEI principles into our day-to-day work and work product. I have to say, at the University of Michigan, this project is being co-led, or this initiative is being co-led by the HRPP and our CTSA. And, we're fortunate to have the same leader. So, Julie being, the leader for both sides helped us bridge this gap. So I want to just say that from the HRPP perspective, because I think most of the other sides, the CTSA is mostly leading the charge. As an HRPP, for us, because protection of research participants is the core function of HRPP and IRB work, I think we're very interested. It's important for us to know, how are things going for these research participants? And, right now, generally, not just at the University of Michigan, I think this is an understudied area in terms of HRPP quality measure. Also, information gathered, via these surveys, although might not be, you might think that, okay, we have like the PIs and the study teams, they're like the mediators between the IRBs. The IRBs don't deal directly with research participants, obviously. Yet we do feel that, any information we gather from these surveys can be a marker that can help us identify areas that need to be addressed. Also, as an AHRP accredited institution, I had to insert this here. I think AHRP always, one of the requirements and the expectations, and it can be sometimes challenging, is to find outcome measures to evaluate the effectiveness of our IRBs. Because sometimes it's hard to measure quality, but we're thinking this could be one of many other measures. So we're hoping that could help us in, one step further in this effort. So what does supporting this or joining this project look like? Like I said, we had initial meetings and discussions with Dr. Kost, who is the national PI for this project. She's been very gracious with her time with us. But although she's going to have to split, as the more sites you get, you're going to have to make time for more institutions. We have been provided with a very detailed and thorough and super helpful implementation guide that really covers every potential or possible aspect of the planning process. That has been very, very helpful. It saved us through, helped us think through this process. We've also been regularly participating in technical meetings that Rhonda and the steering committee, I guess, has been holding. Those are great opportunities for for us to give them updates on where we are with our process, ask them questions, get their insights, but also see what's happening with other sites and learning from their experiences as they continue to implement this survey. And like Rhonda said, I think the beauty of this project is, although they're using standardized, validated tools, it's a collaborative process, but also there are a lot of flexibilities for institutions and a lot of institutional decisions that would have to be made on how you want to implement the survey in your institution in a way that aligns with the scope and nature of your program, with the institutional priorities and needs. So again, the implementation guide covers, these are some of them, highlighting some of the areas that were covered in that implementation guide, just guide us a lot of consideration on how to engage stakeholders, a lot of good technical information that are, we have a fantastic REDCap team that established the project, but also on how to administer the survey via REDCap, information about the data analysis, how to operationalize that, result dissemination, and how to link information to the consortium dashboard. Oh, this looked so much better on my computer, but I think the colors are not coming across here. So a little bit about our, what we've been doing in the past year in terms of implementation. So obviously we had to put together a team to, think about operationalizing this. So the team had representatives from the HRPP, from our Michigan Institute for Clinical and Health Research, which is the name that we use for our CTSA, people from our clinical trials support office, and analysts who have expertise in obtaining data from our clinical trial management system. And we have a great data office. They're more like an honest broker that we've been working with, because they're good at bridging and linking information from the CTMS system and EPIC, which is our electronic medical record system. We obviously sought a lot of input from various groups. We presented this to, we have an HRPP advisory committee group, or HRPP council, which has faculty representation from the various schools and colleges in our institution that conduct human subject research. So we presented them with some of the initial ideas, sought feedback from them. We also discussed this with the clinical trials support office leadership. We also have a clinical trials collaboration team that Julie is in discussions with. We also even thought we have a research ethics committee, or research ethic consults. We also sought some consultation from those members. So that was all, the feedback that we got was, very helpful and helped us in this planning process. Additionally, we had, we spent a lot of time reviewing the implementation guide. We had to apply we submitted an IRB application, and it was determined that this is a not regulated quality improvement project. We also executed a data use agreement with the Data Coordinating Center, and that would allow us to share de-identified data to aggregate it on the dashboard. And I think we spent I have to emphasize, the communication plan was a huge piece of this. We spent a lot of time thinking, okay, how we have some ideas, we got feedback, but then, how do we raise awareness? Who needs to know about this before we start implementing? We're a big place here, so, we needed to think through. We have a great communication team that, helped us put together a plan that we're working through. So I think we spent a lot of time over the summer, presenting this and thinking about making plan. Okay, we're gonna share it, slowly but surely with larger and larger groups, and I think eventually in some newsletters. So study teams are aware. There is no really action items for our study teams, but they need to know that we're undertaking this effort. So some of the kind of like local decisions that would need to be made, and some of the thinking, or at least that's what we're thinking, I would say so far. Maybe some of this might be subject to change. So how do we obtain data on U of M research participants? So it was decided that at this point we use ENCORE as the clinical trial management system, and at this point in time, this is one of the very few central databases where we can identify research participants, and I think that's similar. A lot of when we were trying to make these decisions, that was clearly based on input that we received from the various groups and leadership on feasibility. What systems do we have in place? What data is available to us? What can we do as a starting point? So what are, at least we're calling this phase 1. How often, and then we learned, I think we benefited from learning from all these case studies of the other institutions, and some are more similar to us than others, so, all these things were considered. So we decided we're gonna do this twice a year, send the survey, we're gonna randomly select 500 research participants that have either consented or signed a consent or completed a study in the last 6 months. And then we decided that we're gonna do this at the enterprise level and not at the study level. So we're just gonna look at the aggregate data. We're not gonna drill down to unit or study level. And then we were wondering, should we, because you could, as a participating site, you could also add your own questions to the core. You have to use the core, I think 25 questions is the short survey. But, after discussing this with multiple teams, we decided that at this point, let's just start with the core questions and see what we learn. And based on information that we gather from phase 1, we will determine if and what questions would be added going forward. And then with whom should we share the results? So initially, results will be, or reports will be shared with leadership, and then the hope is that, ultimately we'll do what, some of our peer institutions did. Hopefully we'll find a channel to share aggregate results with our research participants, or, maybe on a website. So this is, in a nutshell, the workflow that we put together. Obviously, in addition to this, we have a very detailed standard operating procedure that outlines how we will implement this step by step. So I will not read this to you, but and again, we're hoping that this fall we will implement maybe the first survey, but then maybe as a phase 2, and if we were successful in implementing this in a year or so, we can consider, do we want to increase sample size, implement it in Spanish? That's another decision. We're just trying at this point to start with the least complicated scenario that we have. So we're not going to implement the Spanish version yet, but the idea is that once we successfully implement the English version, we will add the Spanish version. Perhaps we will explore opportunities to expand beyond the ENCORE and Michigan Medicine studies to see how can we disseminate this across other schools and colleges and all the great research that's happening across the institution. Maybe add questions to the survey. One thing we're thinking, maybe we can host, if we identify certain areas, maybe we can host focus groups to drill down to any areas of concern and think about, think about the action items that we can take to improve things, and hopefully partner with various units to promote awareness around the survey and improve response rates. So that's all I have at this point, and we have plenty of time, I think, for questions. Yeah. I think people are speechless.
A list of questions. Microphones? Yeah. Should we stay here or sit down?
So glad you're here.
Thank you very much. It's super interesting. So I have about 10 questions. I'll go through them quickly. Okay, I'll start with my most immediate question, and I think I'm not sure who should answer this. If institutions add questions, are you concerned about the overall validity and reliability of your instrument as you move forward? I think that's...
can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, I'm not concerned about its reliability or validity. So it's been tested in a number of different populations, and so the Cronbach alpha is very high, but not too high. We've done retest reliability, meaning that you ask someone to take it again a week later and see how similar their answers are when they take it twice. So we've done all that, and we feel pretty confident.
So even if people add additional questions?
No, so additional questions would need to be validated. So we're not
Right.
adding questions to the core right now, but for instance, one of our early adopters, most of the questions are in pretty plain language, but a couple of them are kind of long. And one site really wanted to shorten those questions. So we tag those so we can filter them out if they misbehave. But we're also going to be able to test that. So we'll look at the reliability of that, and we might adopt those on the core survey if they behave well. So similarly, anyone who adds a new question, so we're writing another grant, and part of that will be formalizing the processes for adding questions to the survey.
Okay, that helps me, because I'm just thinking about down the line, because I find this super interesting.
And just one more, like pediatric, just to jump on that, we've had a lot of interest in developing a pediatric survey. It is a whole other thing. Parents, children, pediatric environment. I need another grant for that, but we have a lot of sites who are interested, but this survey is not validated for children.
Okay. So that gets me to my next question. Is there anything in the plans for social behavioral, something like this, kind of piggybacking on this in terms of participants' experiences with social behavioral studies because of the downstream effects that we know that happen in many communities that are vulnerable or disenfranchised, or people are speaking out without including the community? So something like this, with the infrastructure you have in place for social behavioral studies, not tied to Encore and all of that, but just this in the spirit of what you're doing.
So the survey infrastructure is not tied to Encore. You can import a list of participants and you can send the survey a number of ways. So it's not specific to biomedical research. You could use this survey in social and behavioral. If you were not satisfied with the range of questions, you could add your own custom questions. So they're very general questions about feeling respected and prepared and, sort of common values. So I don't think it's inapplicable.
Are any of the institutions currently using it for social behavioral, or is it mostly tied to clinical?
So I don't know the full distribution. For instance, Wake Forest is sending it across their whole health system, so I would have to ask him.
Okay, thank you. All right, hang on here. I have another question. Along with the big topic regarding IRB effectiveness that's been in recent literature, and I know that you mentioned it in terms of how AHRP has, looks at the effectiveness of IRBs, and this could be one way of part of QA/QI. Have you, or either one of you, overlapped that yet to see if there are any sorts of correlations between IRB effectiveness and participant voice in any way?
So our tool is a set of measures.
Yeah.
And you can use them
however we
to
want.
Look for associations against anything that you track. So I don't think I can answer your question in terms of, I don't think we've defined IRB effectiveness, although I think consent is, the
great
target.
measure, yeah.
But I can say that AHRP loves this tool. And we received, on our last accreditation, we got a, whatever it's called, distinction.
Okay.
Distinction with a star.
Okay, yeah, it just seems like such a great idea. Elise going to say, okay.
That was AHRP, not OHRP.
OHRP, I'm sure, loves it too.
I don't know what OHRP thinks.
Okay, I think that covers, well, I guess my last question was, with regards to post-approval monitoring of specific studies, I know you said that some of the investigators, I think it was Duke, tied it to specific studies, the instrument to specific studies. Do you know if they're looking at it with post-approval monitoring along the way?
I think this is a little different than post-approval monitoring is more like an audit. process for the conduct of the study.
Right, but if something was kind of going on with the study and then to hear the voices of the participants.
Again, so we have a limited implementation with these sites to sort of demonstrate that the infrastructure works. And so there are lots of opportunities going forward. I don't think, the other thing is that sites have privacy,
Right.
Confidentiality about what their specific scores are and what they're doing with it. So I can't answer that for Duke.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you both for the presentations, really interesting. So my question is, I'm very sensitive to language and language use. So obviously we're in the era where we are talking about diversity and inclusivity. So I wonder if Rhonda, you might have talked about it and I might have missed it when you were talking about it. So with your surveys, I guess apart from translating into different languages, what about the cultural aspect of how people understand a certain question? That may be different. I wonder if you've looked into that aspect at all.
So it's a great question. The only language that we've translated this into is Spanish, and we did that back in 2010. We did that with UT Southwestern, and they had a Spanish unit, and we sort of had long debates about the different standard versus dialectical versions of Spanish. In our next grant, if we get it, one area in sort of broadening the reach of this will be to pay attention to special populations. And these will be whatever special population a site wants to focus on, and some of those may be foreign language or immigrant populations. So, the comment was made earlier, I think, by Barbara Beer about various tools not being validated in other languages. So it's always a challenge, right? But I'm definitely aware that you can't just go to Google Translate the survey and expect it to work in a population that might have different cultural meaning.
And I guess maybe not directly related, but a question that I have about this is I'm just thinking, so, obviously, the surveys attract people respond to those questions, right? So have you ever looked into or tried to look into the people who did not respond and maybe the reasons for that? I know it's really hard. I mean, I asked that question and I know it's really hard to, but I wonder if you've thought about doing something about that group that did not respond, because I wonder if there may be, interesting information that comes out of the group that did not respond to the surveys.
Right, so it's definitely beyond the scope of the current grant, which was, can we build an infrastructure to make it easier to use, and if we use it, does it work? Non-responders are always very interesting. I think, the great thing about this model, even though it's harder for sites, is by pulling in the descriptors about the non-responders, at least we now can begin to describe who didn't respond. I think it's very challenging with IRBs when someone says, I don't want to participate in research, to say, oh, great, but could I just do a little research on why you don't want to participate in research? So I think it's very important. And it's often a criticism of any survey, that doesn't have 100% response rate. It's like, well, this is only 30%, this is only 20% of people. Yes, but it's still 20% of people who told you, who engaged and told you about their experience, and they weren't all great. So, you work with what you have, and, we can keep working on that. Yeah.
It's a question for the implementation of the survey at University of Michigan. Why did you decide not to be able to drill down to the study level? Because it possibly could be a teaching opportunity, a training opportunity for those participants, and also depending on how big the study is. But I think you decided to remove the ability to go down to the study level, right?
Well, I think that was a, maybe decision made by the leadership, but I think it's aligns better with, we're a big institution, and this, I think, just is consistent with our, cultural, institutional culture. But, we might, who knows, maybe we might, rethink this in a year. But that's what we decided to do initially. And also, like I said, we've been studying all these use cases and talking to all these peer institutions, the 5 institutions that have been doing it for almost a decade. And just based on those conversations, we decided, at this point in time, as a starting point, that's the approach that we will take. I mean, again, it's, what works best for our institution is not necessarily what's best for your institution. So and I think that's the great thing about the implementation process is you have this flexibility and, you have to tailor it to your scope and nature and the culture in your institution.
So if I could just add something. So data is, of course, the currency of investigators. And when you have investigators who are reluctant or nervous or fearful, then sometimes it might be better to present the aggregate data and have these data experts say, well, how do you know which study? And let it be their idea that the next round is to survey with trackable metadata.
Good question. Thank you for asking.
Participant experience. So this is great. I love that you're doing this work.
Thank you.
And, it's nationwide, so that's great. One thing I think a potential of it is because it's in REDCap and it doesn't require ENCORE or EPIC, that we could get some information about research being conducted at smaller institutions. So I see a lot of potential for what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I think we're at time. Before we're gonna wrap up with a question and answer session with our federal partners, but as we're setting, I think, the podium here, I do want to note that you will find this QR code on the tables. Please, if you have a couple of minutes before we start the next session, this will take you to an evaluation survey for day 2. We'll follow up, probably send the link by email, but if you have a few minutes now, we would appreciate your feedback.